No, that's good, that all tests as good. So now I'll pop that to one side, clean up this lens mount, and we will fit the shutter to the lens mount. As usual, I'm cleaning away any old grease and with it any dirt or grit or dust, anything that might cause a problem. Wiping around the outside because it gives me a chance to inspect it. Let's turn this over. That's an almost clean side, that'll do nicely. That port that you see there on that cover, you can get access to the retard gear train through that on a completed shutter and make very fine adjustments to the speeds, but I don't expect to have to do that. Generally, get this in the right position. Speeds are usually set, adjusted and got correct when the shutter is being serviced, and if the speeds change at a later date, it's usually because the shutter needs to be serviced, not because the speeds have mysteriously gone out of adjustment. So I'm not a great one for the practice of adjusting speeds on a shutter without having first serviced it. Just doesn't make sense to me. Pop that idler in place. Now we have a ball, and that ball sits in that position on that spring, and that ball provides us with the detents for the shutter speeds, so that the shutter speeds click nicely into the 1 second, half second, quarter, eighth, etc., and don't just float around. So I'm just running some molybdenum paste onto the speed cam where it would run on those detents on that ball, and I'm also just running some on the top surface of the case here at that point, because this will be getting pressed down into that. It needs to run smoothly. That looks good. That's all in place. The ball sitting there. We've got to get this in place without disturbing that ball. And get it all screwed down. I'll just pop one of the screws in loosely to keep it in position. That's all I want to do. And another one over here. And then we will rotate the cocking action from the back of the shutter and check that it engages everything correctly. It appears to do so. So I'll just nip that screw up a little bit tighter, and its mate over here. Drop the third one into position. Check that this disc is centered, and it's not. That's it, it's just clipped into position. I heard that drop into place. The shutter does cock and it fires. That's good, that's smooth. Alright, so I can nip those 3 screws up. 1, 2, 3, and we have the 4th screw, which is a chrome headed screw, goes in from the outside of the case. Here we have it. So that shutter, we'll try, it will set the self timer, and we're set to whatever speed it was, an 8th I think I said. No, it's about a quarter really. See if this all runs down smoothly, and then the shutter should fire. I think it's either a quarter or a half. There you go, nice and smooth. Okay, so that shutter's serviced. That can be reassembled onto the front section. While I was waiting for something to happen, the batteries to charge or something, I refitted the leatherettes onto here. Haven't done anything else since then, so that's all ready to go, and I think that'll probably have to wait for another day now. Alright, time to start reassembling the shutter assembly into the front housing. So, we'll start with our completed shutter. Make sure that the shutter release tab here is in the up position so it doesn't trap anything. Bit of fluff there, get rid of that. Get the flash sync lead through the hole in the case. That all looks good. 4 screws. I've already used a multimeter to check my flash connections to make sure that nothing was shorted to the chassis and that the solder joints were good and there was continuity where there should be. Just check that's pulled down evenly. Looks good. Bit of fluff there from cotton buds. All right. Okay. This cam. These little washers. The spring that holds it down in place with its screw. and the gear that drives that cam. So I've just put a bit of molybdenum paste on those shim washers, just a tiny smear. The larger of the two drops over that shaft. Here's the cam. And I want to lubricate this surface. It drops into place. Our gear, I'll just run the molybdenum paste into the centre, make sure that's lubricated. There's a little tab on the back of that gear that engages with that cam. Or should do. That's it, it's dropped into place. The small washer, the spring, and its retaining screw. Do that spring up tight, screw up tight, check the action, that swings smoothly. Get the next components ready. Okay. This little gear here is the cocking gear for the shutter. It's got a D-shaped slot in the back of it, so it fits over this shaft. Here we have the rack. And I'm just giving that a little wipe with the molybdenum. And get that positioned. Checking that it's sitting flat. Now, the first slot between the teeth at the bottom here should be straight up and down on that cam. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That position there. Hang on, just one tooth out I think there. About one tooth there. That's where that wants to be. That's most definitely not right. Just doesn't want to sit down in place. That, I think, is correct. The cover plate, which holds all this down, needs to be lubricated in the centre with a little bit of molybdenum. That's the bush that guide bush for this particular gear. It's got a raised centre. Two screws. Do those up tight. This is the buffer for the mirror. That needs to be glued in position. Right, that drops in position here. That little cutout in the centre of it is to make sure it clears the teeth on that gear, making sure that's centred correctly. That looks fine. Just press that into position. Now I've got some glue on my tweezers. I need to see the back of that. Otherwise things will be sticking. Okay, So we've got our main gear that connects to the cam from the front of running across the camera, and it's bush. So I want to put a little bit of molybdenum on the inside where it runs on the bush. Needs very little. One face of this is dead flat. One face of it has a slight raise in the centre. Now the dead flat section goes to the back against the casting. Drop the bush into there. This component looks after the flash sink. It disconnects the flash when the shutter is cocked for viewing. Just putting a bit of molybdenum paste on that pin at the bottom. That's where it gets lifted up by that rack, and I'll just run a little bit through the centre there where it pivots on this screw. Now swing this into position, wiggle it under there. May have to loosen that screw to get it to clear. That'll be enough. That's it. Drop the screw into place. It's not picking up the thread, can't find that hole. That's better. Started. Right. Excuse me. That lever's not pulled back correctly. That's better. Let's try that again. Get that screw to centre. It's got a shoulder on it. It needs to be centred correctly. That all looks good. Nip that screw up tight. I'll pull that contact out of the way for the moment. That looks like it's ready for testing. So I will find my testing stuff and we'll do it. Okay, so here I've got a shaft I use for testing, so I can pop that in there, twist it to cock the shutter, release the shutter, the blades close, lift this arm, and the shutter runs down. So that's all good. There was no unusual stiffness there in that action. That all ran very smoothly. So we're getting well advanced with this. I can solder my flash contacts back on. Oh, before that I'll get this release lever back in place. This has all been cleaned. I'll just give it a very light wipe with molybdenum. Make sure that it runs smoothly. Let's get that in place. Two screws, of course. The upper one is the post for the spring to hook over. The other one just has a guide, it just guides that release. Do those up tight, not as tight as the last person. And here's the return spring. Hook that over that post. Check that it's seated in the groove. Nice smooth action. It's quite a strong return spring on there. It would always make the shutter release fairly springy. Now, prepare for soldering. So there's our fibre washer. It fits over the flash sink terminal there. Or should do. That's better. Gets that down into place. That's good. That contact can be folded back over it. Now I'll go away and I'll solder this wire to it, and at the same time I will put back the other wire which sat there. Okay, well that's all soldered back in place. I want to put some black paint on here to do two jobs. One to cover that terminal, and secondly to seal that fibre washer in place so it doesn't move. I'll run a little bit of this matte black paint around the edge. That'll effectively glue that fibre washer in position. And I'll just put a little bit over the end of the wire and just pretty it up. That looks good. I'll just check my work, make sure everything's looking good. That shutter is ready to go back into the camera. So we can put that aside, the shutter's done. I can turn my attention to working on the body. The componentry for that is put aside, and a lot of the parts are in the cleaner. So I'll have to go and get them, and then we'll work on that.